Hey kids, glad you all made it. Oh my gosh, I have to say it's been a while, and I have to say I almost miss you guys. Everybody's looking good. The best thing about this crowd is everybody here is too old to die young, so we're safe now. We made it. Oh my gosh. Might be a small class today. I had a reschedule and that might have confused some people, but that's okay. That means more attention for you guys and gals. And as I usually do, I record these groups, so they'll be on YouTube later if you want to kind of, mull over the notes. And I did send out the outline, so if you have that printed out, now's the time to get your pen ready, and we're going to be scribbling all over it. But I really appreciate you guys being here. I have a blast doing these workshops because we just get to nerd out on something, and just geek out on it. And remember that the rules are, please have your channel muted unless you're asking a question, and then go ahead and raise your hand and we'll unmute you. That way we don't have to hear your chihuahuas and your fans and your, microwaves. So this, before I begin, I'd like to mention real quick, on August 22nd, if you don't already know, I'm giving a workshop on what I think is one of the most interesting subjects I've ever taught. And that's the art of expression, how to express yourself on your instrument. And so we'll be basically analyzing a bunch of classic players, from Jimi Hendrix to Eric Clapton to Bill Monroe, and trying to find out what it is about their playing that makes it sound like they're saying something with their instruments. So that's going to be Saturday, August 22nd at the usual 10 a.m. PST. But today's class is going to be really fun, really easy, laid-back blues. And to clarify, this is the musical study of blues, not the social study of blues, which generally has to do with just having lots of life problems. That's a little out of my jurisdiction. I can't handle that part of the blues for you. I can teach you how to express those on your instrument. That's where I come in. And one thing about these workshops is, you probably know, they're not instrument specific. So if I have a guitar on, don't have hurt feelings because I'm not necessarily playing your instrument. I'll try to grab up a couple different ones, but all these concepts we'll be talking about are for all instruments across the board. It's more musical rather than technical. So, blues. Gosh, I know everyone who works with me, to some degree, plays some blues on their instruments. Some of you are writing blues solos now and just composing blues phrases, and it's really, really cool. Some of y'all actually found me through like blues videos on YouTube. I love the blues. I think it's just one of the most easy to play, yet most challenging forms of music out there. It's really amazing. And to start out, if you look at your outline, I talk about 4 things that kind of define what it means musically to play the blues. Okay? And the first thing is, if you just picked up your instrument of choice and you played Coming Around the Mountain in G, she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes. And we just made the G, C, and D in the 7th chords. That's why I made that the first item on here. Playing the 7th chords gives it that, what I call built-in angst, that kind of that feeling of having the blues. It's kind of tension. So now if I were to play something very not bluesy, like Coming Around the Mountain, and I use 7th chords, she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes. Already, you can see just putting 7th chords into your jams give you that flavor. Then item B under 1 is, I call it the dinosaur of scales, the blues scale. Probably the most ancient scale primates have been using since time immemorial. And we'll discuss that a little later on in the class, what makes it a blues scale. But basically, it's the 5-note minor pentatonic, and we're going to be using that a lot in this class today. And then C under item 1, playing in 3s. Most traditional blues is not in 2/4. It's in 12/8 or 6/8, if you will. And it's all grouped in 3s, which goes back to like African music and drums when you're doing rhythms together. So for example, let's take our song that we're going to beat up today, Coming Around the Mountain. What if we not only used 7th chords, but we played it in rhythms of 3? So as opposed to pick, strum, pick, strum, pick, strum, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to pick up a ukulele. I'm going to try to punish all instruments equally today. So let's say we're in G, we're playing Coming Around the Mountain, which I picked that song because that's like the antithesis of the blues. It's so not bluesy, very not bluesy. And so if we play seventh chords and we play that same song in threes, check out what happens. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. Now it sounds like it could be a blues song. It's really wild. I did two things. I played it in triplets or threes, and I used seventh chords. The reason I'm showing you this is because today's class is not so much about how to be an amazing blues player. It's how to take the blues tips and tricks and add it to the music you already do. Whether it's Turkey in the Straw or a John Prine song. How to bluesify what you already play on your instrument. And that's much more useful for us. And then finally, item D under 1 is the lyrical content. It's usually about people having some sort of a bad hair day. But the feeling that arises out of this is really enjoyable for some reason, and I don't know why this is. I can't answer that in the class. When I'm just at a jam session or sitting around the campfire, I love all kinds of music except, hip hop and rap. There's a good joke a student told me. Why is candy and music alike? They're both better without the rapper. Anyway, moving on. So let's say we're playing a blues in E. For some reason, a minute and a half into that, it's like endorphins start coursing through your bloodstream. Something about that feeling makes us in a good mood. That's the irony of that. So that's why item D is like hard times lyrics, but we get good feelings out of them. And that's kind of the message here. Let's move on to number 2, and let's dig into the seventh chord. Some of you already know all this because you work with me with music theory privately, but it doesn't hurt to review it. So, what is the seventh chord? We put the seventh degree of the scale into the chord. So let me open up a sheet music and talk a little bit more about this because it's really good theory. If there's one bit of theory that you know, it's this one. So let's say you have a G triad, G, B, and D, okay? Now, if you put the seventh degree of the scale, which would be an F, on top of that and played it all together, you now have a G7 chord. Mark my words, take a note if you need to. You have to flat the seventh. You have to move it down a fret. So if you don't, it won't sound like blues. It'll sound like Steely Dan or you're in an elevator. So let me demonstrate. We're in the key of G. Good old G major scale. If I flat the seventh degree, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I took that F sharp and I moved it down to an F. Anyone, even without musical training, can tell you that sounds kind of, what would be the term? Kind of upset, kind of anxious, kind of tense. Check this out. That note there is the blues note, my friends. So we put that on top of the chord. Here's my G triad. Now I put the seventh on top, the flat seventh. And we have the blues chord. The reason why I bring this up is there's another chord too. It's called the major seventh. And let me talk about this for a minute. If you were to not flat the seventh and put the degree in the chord, we get a jazz chord. There's my natural sharp 7. If I put a sharp 7 on top of a G chord, watch what happens. That's not blues. That's, you're in the mall, you're shopping at Macy's. And you know what's funny? Some bands, especially in like the 70s and 80s, adopted the major 7th chord and it's used in a lot of light 70s, like hits, like a Gordon Lightfoot, oh gosh. But it's not blues. But it's important to know when people say, oh yeah, I know theory. You put the 7th on top of the chord, it makes it bluesy. No, you put the flat 7th on it. Otherwise you're playing Steely Dan, okay? So now item B under 2 talks about, yes, there are some cousins of the blues 7th chord. And that's the major 7, which we just sort of judged on. And then we have the minor 7th. So if you take a minor chord, once again, I'm going to predominantly be using the people's key of G to demonstrate this. If you take a minor chord, let's say G minor, and you put the flat 7 on top of that, we get a really cool sound. And I'm encouraging all of my students to experiment with the minor 7th chord. Whenever there's a minor chord, you can replace it with a minor 7th. Okay? And if you need the chord chart, if you go to jamalong.org and click on the resources and then charts, there's some really cool chord charts that show you jazz chords for all these instruments. Let me give you an example. What's a song we would play? Oh, Blackberry Blossom, popular fiddle tune. If you haven't done this one, ask me in our next lesson. It's like the Stairway to Heaven of fiddle tunes. But the first part is in major, very happy major mode. Then it goes to the E minor on the second. If you were to take that E minor and play an E minor 7 instead, we get kind of an uptown sort of bluesy jazz feel now. So whenever you see a minor chord in any of your songs, remember, this goes more into jazz theory, but it's worth mentioning, you can replace it with a minor 7th chord. And a lot of blues people do that. When they go to minor chords, they use minor 7s, like in Summertime or But the Living Is, yes, the classic blues song. Now, we talked about that. Okay, now we're going to go to item C under 2. This is sort of a no-brainer, but it is important to make sure that you know the dominant 7th positions for at least, G, C, D, F, and A, like the big 5. Or your moving shapes, moving around. That's kind of a prerequisite to playing any of this music in the class today. So now we get to actually break open the egg and talk about blues under item 3. Everything is the 12 bar. Let's unpack this. Once again, if you worked with me in private lessons, you know that I'm always explaining how every blues song you'll ever hear on the radio or YouTube is the 12 bar blues. Just dressed up with different keys and different rhythms. For example, if I was to do this, that's a slow 12/8 12 bar blues in E. If I was to do this, that's also a 12 bar blues. I'm playing it in G and I'm playing more of a funk rhythm. If I was to do this, also 12 bar blues. Just done Travis picking in a folk style. You could even do like Milk Cow Blues, a classic bluegrass song, is a 12 bar blues dressed up in a bluegrass groove. It would be like this. But all of these songs are one chord progression. If you search on 12 bar blues on the JamAlong site, there's a lesson that has a chart with the 12 bar blues in all common keys. And I'm going to reference that chart now because it's really handy to know where that is. So for example, let's look at the 12 bar blues in different keys. The lesson I'm referring to, which you should have bookmarked, is very handy, it's called 12 bar blues workout. It's on the site. And it has keys of A, C, D, E, and G, and the chords for each of them. So for example, you would click on the chord chart, and this is a good one to have printed out. And I've got the 12 bar blues in A, C, D, E, G, the people's key. And it's all the same chord progression. Now in this class, I'm not going to so much get into numbers. Some of you are thinking, well, why aren't you saying 1, 4, 5? Because we did that in the theory class a couple months ago. We already traumatized people with that. We're just going to deal with keys in this class. So for example, you want to get familiar with these keys. I'm going to jump over to the key of G. The structure of this chord progression is very critical to learn. And once you start to see the pattern, it connects all of the songs you'll ever hear in the blues genre. We stay on the key. Then on the second line, we go to the 4, we go to the C, and then we go back to the root, the key. And on the last line, the third time, we hit the 5 chord right here. We go back to the 4, and then we run along back home at the key. And sometimes we put a 5 chord, a D7, at the very end. It's called a turnaround. That kicks us back to the beginning of the song. That's where you'll hear people do stuff like this. That's where that little lick comes in at the end of the blues progression. So have this handy, because we're going to refer to this more and more as we get into how to solo using the blues, because you want to be familiar with this form. We're going to circle back to that. Everything that you hear bluesy is this progression, no matter what key it's in. Very important to know. So now let's talk about common grooves. This is item C under 3, common grooves, and you may want to write this down. It's good to practice the blues, this progression, and a number of common grooves. First is the slow 12/8. The slow 12/8, and I should have put this on the outline, that's why you might want to note this. The slow 12/8 is the most traditional original blues groove. That's where we're playing at a slow tempo, because we have the blues and we're depressed. And we're playing in threes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that would be, if I'm playing that 12-bar blues right here, let me go back to the diagram here, and I play it in a slow 12/8, all of a sudden you have the most classic sound. It sounds like, you know, anything B.B. King or Eric Clapton did. First line, second line. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Threes, slow 12/8. The second most common is the rock and roll blues, which is also known as the Boogie Woogie. I can't say that word without smiling. I just call it the rock and roll blues. And that's where we have basically like a standard 2/4 rock beat. The G. And then we plug in what's called the Boogie Woogie bass line. And that's something that's not a bad idea to learn on your instruments. Dennis, in fact, I think we've done this with our blues studies, is based a couple of banjo solos on the Boogie Woogie bass line. And you might want to note this. That is just playing 7th chord arpeggios that match the 12-bar blues. That's a great study. There's a great puzzle later tonight over a glass of wine or coffee or whatever, or both, half and half. You want to try to play the arpeggios to the 7th chords matching a 12-bar blues. And we would get this. Here's the G. Here's the C. Here's the D. See, we've all heard that. That's like probably the most classic blues cliche ever, other than which we'll unpack in a minute. So that also goes into, you can go up and down with the Boogie Woogie bass line. We would be this. First line, here's the second line. First line. Last line. So these are the tools that we want to use in other styles of music. You can use that for a sing-along if you sneak it in and you're clever enough. So let's look at so we talked about common grooves. Another common groove that I like to use, in particular, like, and this is so fun to do this on the ukulele because you don't expect it, is you would call it a funk groove. So if we're in G, and I'm going to play the 12-bar blues. So we have slow 12/8, we have rock or boogie woogie. Now we're talking about funk blues. These are the common styles. Here's the 4, back to 1. Very common in like late night, just crazy jams around the fire where people just go and go on a song. And then of course we have the country blues. This is one that we want to take a note of because it's common in bluegrass blues crossover. Okay, and so that would be like, for example, Milk Cow Blues. Very, very classic example of bluegrass turning into blues. Let's think about, so you take a bluegrass or country beat. Get our 7th chords, we follow that same progression. So we should have about 5, at least almost half a dozen common styles that you want to think of when you play that 12-bar blues progression. Don't just get stuck in one groove. Now, common keys in transposing. You'll notice on that chart I'm referring to, I give you like 4 common keys, but it's not a bad idea to get handy with transposing into different keys. And how I teach transposing is I use a chart I call the Chord Families. And some of you probably already have that who worked with me before. So let's say we're playing in the key of G, the people's key. And our 12-bar blues uses, you guessed it, the primary chords of 1, 4, and 5, or G, C, and D. And the singer has had a long night and doesn't want to sing that low, so we need to transpose it up to A. Guess what? Now our 1, 4, and 5 is A, D, and E. It's really that simple. It really is that simple. And you want to probably print this out and have it handy, just to, if you are having trouble transposing, just look at the pattern of the chords and then move it over to the given key. Blues in E, probably the most popular blues key, E, A, and B. So this 12 bar blues workout here basically already did the transposition for you. But whether you're using the circle of fifths or the chord families chart from my website, it's really handy to at least have, I like to do the big five, G, C, D, F, and A in the blues progression. That covers your bases. So now, let's talk about the evolution of the blues scale under item 4, okay? This is where we start to have fun now. Now we're talking about how we use blues in a jam session. Okay, the blues scale basically is a pentatonic scale. And that means it's got 5 notes. Penta, Greek for 5. 5 items. And so the formula, and you might want to write this down, the formula should be emblazoned in your brainstem, is 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. I'll go over that again. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. Okay? That's the 5-note minor pentatonic blues scale. That's where everything comes from. So let's say we played that formula. Here's my 1. Here's my flat in 3rd. Already it sounds bluesy. Here's my 4th, my 5th, my flat 7, and then finally the 1 again, or the 8. Now we have this. Works on every instrument across the board. I love it on the ukulele. Banjo too, melodic style, great instrument for playing the minor pentatonic scale on the banjo. I like a lot of players like Bill Keith or Bobby Thompson from way back. They were always using that, the minor pentatonic and the melodic style. And we get this. Kind of a mountain sound, kind of spooky, but definitely that blues tinge. So it all starts with 1 flat 3, 4, 5 flat 7, the minor pentatonic scale. That's the overview. Now let's look at item 2 under B under 4, and we're talking about why this is the safety scale. Because I don't know whether it's thousands of years of people jamming around campfires, but there's no bad notes in that scale. You can't hit a bad note. Now, when we add more notes in, yes, then you'll have the option to make a bad note. But as you know, my formula that I recommend everyone follows, if you do play a bad note, just immediately repeat that and tell people you're a jazz musician. But this is, I call it the safety scale, meaning you can roll them around and just go crazy on it, and you're not going to hit a bad note. Now, we talked about building the minor pentatonic. That's the formula. Let's go to item C, which is adding color tones. Here's where it starts to get fun. After a while, even though that's a really awesome scale, it gets a little bit monotonous. I mean, it's cool, but I feel like there wants to be more there. So let's talk about the main color tones you're going to add. Let's skip down to 2 under C, adding color tones. I call these the mean notes for the minor pentatonic scale. You want to start adding, and write this down, you want to add the flat 5 and the sharp 7. That's the modern blues scale. That's the one that you hear like Eric Clapton using, and not so much B.B. King, but like players who are a little more jazz oriented. So let me demonstrate. Here's our minor pentatonic scale. The flat 5. That's such a bluesy note. Because this is the 5th. 1, 2, 3. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the 5th. If I flat that, it becomes probably the most bluesy note in the history of Western music. In fact, the flat 5, as I like to mention, was for centuries not allowed. If you're a composer in the 17th century and you use a flat 5th in your composition for the Duke, he'd probably fire you if he caught you. It was the devil's note. If for some reason, throughout history, people have been very leery of this note. And in fact, if you do a flat 5th, let's say we play, here's the root. 1, 2. flat it. Let's do it an octave higher. So if I play just the flat fifth and the root, guess what happens? Every alarm, any horror movie where the guy's coming in with a knife, they always use that interval, the flat fifth. Now, the trick to making it work is you always want to try to descend from the flat fifth down to the fourth. That's how we use the flat fifth in most of our music, descending downwards, whether it's a slide or a bend. Okay, this is something I want you guys to practice. So if you're playing our minor pentatonic blues scale, I'm going to add the flat five right there. It's pretty cool. But now if we use it to descend down to the four, we get this. It sounds more artful, like we know what we're doing with it. So how do we do that? I'm a big fan of slides because they work on all instruments here. Everybody's instrument that's at this class can use a slide on that. So for example, you would play and like we'll talk about in a bit, repetition is huge. You could do that a bunch of times. That's a very bluesy statement. That's like you're telling them again and again. I lost my keys. I had the blues so bad I threw my martini across the lawn. So that's actually a Steve Martin blues line. He's like, if your life is really great, you probably shouldn't be writing blues lyrics because you'd be writing like, da, 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 da. I had the blues so bad I threw my martini across the lawn. It landed in the jacuzzi. Da, 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 da. So it all depends on how authentic we want to be. Now, let's talk about the other one, the sharp seven. Sharp seven is not a bluesy sound. It's a very happy major sound like we talked about earlier in the major seventh chord. So using it inside of the minor pentatonic scale becomes a blues tone. Check this out. Here's my flat seven, my sharp seven, and it works somehow if you keep the flat in there. So there's your full four-square street legal modern blues scale. Let's write down the formula. Ready? Modern blues scale is 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7, sharp 7, parentheses 1, meaning or 8. And then I want you to circle where you wrote flat 5 and sharp 7. Just to clarify, those are the mean notes, the color tones that we added in. Okay? When we're learning to improvise on the blues, that gives you a lot more room to play with. And it's the same thing too. You can slide into those color tones. So let's compare on the banjo. Here's the pure minor pentatonic scale. Now I'm going to add in the flat 5. How bluesy is that? You can see that's the most like just pathos and passionate note there is for playing blues. And that's why a lot of players, including myself, like to bend up or down from that note. Tony Rice, bless his hallowed name, is a guitar god, and he became known for playing bluegrass using the modern blues scale. That was one of his tricks. He would go, and all his cliches you'll hear him do. He was always pulling off from 2 to 1 on the second string. That's because that was the flat 5 descending to the 4. You can do that on any instrument. This works for all instruments. So if you're playing your modern blues scale, Roseanne, and you're adding all the tones, right there, from that first fret, third string, pulling off to 0, classic blues phrase there because we're descending from the flat fifth to the 4. What's one of the most classic hooks ever written? Check this out. It's really hilarious to hear that on the ukulele, by the way. So, Smoke on the Water. Guess what makes that work? Watch. Ooh, they just jump right up to the devil's note, descend to the fourth, and go back down. Now, I'm not sure if they did that consciously or if they were very conscious much of the time. Probably not. But that's the trick that you learn to employ to have that bluesy sound. So if you just went like this, and you didn't descend, now we're back to the horror movie or the alarm. We need the fourth in there that resolves it. I love the Keith Richards quote. He's like, I don't have a drug problem. I have a police problem. And a great blues player. Great blues player. Pretty much all of his solos, blues scales, minor pentatonic scale. Okay. Now, under 4, item C, subsection I, blue notes for the major pentatonic. If you listen to the Allman Brothers and even a lot of Eric Clapton, you'll notice something very strange but awesome. They're playing major scales over the blues. They're playing the major pentatonic scale. And they're adding certain blue notes to make it a little more bluesy. So let's write down the major pentatonic scale is, the formula is 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, parentheses 1. Now, you'll notice that's just a major scale that we took out the 4 and the 7. So, let's play the major, that major pentatonic scale. Okay, now, that doesn't sound very bluesy at all, does it? It sounds annoyingly happy. It's not bluesy at all. However, if you add in, so write this down, the blue notes for the major pentatonic are the flat third and the flat 7. Ooh, recognize those? We borrowed those from the minor pentatonic scale. We're sneaking them in to the major pentatonic scale, and the result is a really interesting blues scale. I call it the bluegrass scale, actually. It's this one. 1, flat 3, major 3, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. It's like where blues and bluegrass meet. It's a really cool intersection. But you can use that. So here's the flag. If the blues you're jamming over sounds not too critically depressed, and it's a little kind of a lively, maybe a country blues, maybe like Milk Cow Blues, that's a good candidate is the major pentatonic scale with the added blue notes. So let me give you an example. Here's like a country blues in G. If I was jamming over that, I would probably not want to do the modern blues scale. Because that's a little too mean for this groove. I would want to play the major pentatonic scale and add those blue tones, and I would get this. Go. We still have that flat 7. We can milk it if we want, you know, and that flat 3. But we have what's called the axis of the flat 3 and the natural 3. And that's another classic. Sliding up from the flat 3 to the natural 3 is probably the biggest melodic cliche in Western music as far as people improvising on their scales. And we've probably done this by accident. Here's an example. Here's my major pentatonic scale with the added blue tones. So now I'm going to go, and I hit that flat 3. I'm going to slide up to the major 3. Works on every instrument. It's a cliche you want to adopt when you're working on improvisation. See if you can sneak in some slides moving from the flat 3 to the major 3 of your major pentatonic blues scale on the mandolin. Wow, all the time, all day long, 3 to 4 right there. Same with all instruments. That's I call it a melodic cliche. It's something people do, whether or not they do it consciously when they're improvising. So here, when you do the classic Scruggs lick, Once again, the biggest cliche in bluegrass banjo. What makes that work is you're sliding in from the flat 3 to the major 3. And a lot of people don't understand why that works for blues. It's because we took a major pentatonic scale and we added the blue notes borrowed from the minor pentatonic scale. And we have a hybrid now. So when you're playing blues, the first 2 scales you should think of, actually there's more, is the minor pentatonic, and then is the modern blues scale, which, as you know, is the minor pentatonic with the flat 5 and sharp 7. And then thirdly, we have what I call the bluegrass scale, which is the major pentatonic with the added blue tones. So your 3 go-to choices when you're soloing on the blues are going to be the minor pentatonic, the modern, which is the amended minor pentatonic, and then the major pentatonic with the blue notes. Okay? Now, there are 2 other scales I like to talk about, and that goes to the bottom line on page 1, modes, which takes us over to page 2. Now, there are 2 modes that are commonly used in blues and bluegrass music for that matter, and it's called the Mixolydian and the Dorian. Now, I have a whole class on that. If you go to YouTube and go to the JamAlong channel and look at the past workshops, the jazz workshop, we really dove into modes. So if you want more of that, go there. We're just going to skip the surface today for blues. The Mixolydian, if you don't already have it memorized, here's the formula. These are great scales to steal. Whenever I give you a formula, what's cool is you can use it in any key. This is like the golden key to that scale. So the Mixolydian formula is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, flat 7. You're going to go, hey, wait a minute. That's just a major scale when we flatted the 7th. Well, of course that's going to work for blues. That's like the 7th. This is like the 7th chord if it was a scale. It's a really handy scale. You'll recognize it. Jerry Garcia used it like 90% of the time soloing. So for example, here's our G major scale. Let's flat the 7. That's bluesy. But it has that happy major 3. So it's kind of more of a lighter, I call it blues light. It's a light flavor. Now the Dorian minor, the formula goes like this. Right, Dorian. 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. It's a minor scale with a raised 6. If that helps you, write that down. That's a little bit theory heavy, but it's a natural minor scale that we bumped the 6 up. Just like the Mixolydian is simply a major scale that we flatted the 7th. So modes are like the gray area between major and minor. They're the colors between black and white. Let's talk about that. The Dorian. Okay, so here's my Dorian scale in G. So it sounds like a very mournful minor scale until you get to that happy raised 6. But then we still have our sort of depressed flat 7. So it's like, once again, blues light. It's a great scale. A lot of people use it, like I said, sometimes by accident because they've got good ears. You don't have to know music theory or read music to do any of this, by the way. When they asked B.B. King in an interview if he could read music, his response was, not enough to hurt my playing. So there's some truth to, we want to put our ears in front and the eyes can take a back seat with all of this stuff. Who was it? There was a famous composer. He said, I wrote a song, but I can't read music, so I don't know what it sounds like. So the funny thing is here, a lot of this comes from listening and playing it. So now we have 2 modes. You now have 5 blues scales, I think, if you add the modes. Minor pentatonic, modern, major pentatonic with blue tones, Mixolydian, yeah, 5 scales for blues. That's really cool, man. That's like a great palette to choose from. And remember, if it's a happy blues, then plug in the majory sounding ones. And if it's a darker minor blues, then you plug in those darker minor sounding scales. So, using blues scales. First things first, number 5. Blues riffs, the most famous blues riff in the world, 0530. What does that mean? Those are scale tones. So if you go and see, That's, I think, one of the biggest blues cliches ever. That's basically based out of the minor pentatonic scale. We're playing those intervals over and over again. So those are blues. There's certain blues riffs that we use. The Boogie Woogie, B2 under 5 is another example of that. Guess what, my friends? That's the Mixolydian scale. That's what makes the Boogie Woogie work. It's based on the Mixolydian scale with that flat seventh in there. Major scales are really dorky. I'll just go ahead and say it. They're dorky. They're great for Christmas music and piano players, but they're not good for a lot of like blues and bluegrass and country music. They're too happy. They're too bright. So the Boogie Woogie uses the Mixolydian that flats the seventh. Let's go to C, improvisation. This is where the rubber meets the road. You know the formulas of your scale. You learned your seventh chord positions. You've taken some lessons with me and learned more scales than a 1,000-pound tuna fish on your fingerboard. How do we use them? Well, the first thing is musicizing. I call this musicizing. It's turning the scale into music. You have to use backing tracks to do this. You have to play with something on YouTube or one of my blues backing tracks to really make this work. And we talk about the 3 R's. Let's start there. Some of you already know this because we went over this. And the 3 R's are rests, repetition, and rhythms. As long as you're doing those 3 things with any of those 5 scales we talked about, you're going to be playing music. So let's take the blues scale in G. And I'll verbalize when I use an R. Check this out. Rest, rest, rest. Rest. Rest, rest. All of a sudden, we're breaking up into sentences. They're like commas. Rests are commas. And it makes it not just like a babbling. We're saying things now. Repetition, the second R. It's magic. I don't know why this worked. If I did, I'd write a book and go on Oprah. It's something heavy duty going on here. Check this out. Repeat. I'm just repeating 3 notes. Rest. Repeat. What if we repeat the cliche I talked about earlier, the flat 5 going down to the 4? All of a sudden, we're making blues phrases because we repeat 2, 3, or 4 notes over and over again in a loop. Okay? And the third R is different rhythms. You always want to think slow, medium, and fast. You want to have slow notes in your scale, medium notes in your scale, and fast notes in your scale. You don't have to know if they're called quarter notes or 8 notes or 16 notes. That's for the music theory people. We just want to know that we're not playing like typing. Every note is like exactly the same. We want to break it up. Check it out. Slow, medium, faster, faster yet, slow. So if you're using rests and repetitions and different rhythms, right away your scale is going to be like hit with a hammer and notes are going to come out. Because really, we don't want to just run up and down the scales. That becomes kind of like annoying to us and those around us. Finally, under V, under C, under 5, we have left-hand ornaments. This is an easy one to plug in. Part of your game when you're sitting around noodling is to say how many slides and hammers and pull-offs can I get into a solo. Now, normally in real life, you wouldn't probably overdo it, but you want to overdo it on purpose when you're practicing this because it's going to allow you to find how many ways you can get away with it. Okay, especially pulling off from the flat 5 to the 4, for example. Sliding up from the flat 3 to the 3, for example. Classic examples. So please remember, 3 R's and what I call LHO or left-hand ornaments when you're improvising. Now D, singing with your instrument, 3-phrase soloing. This is probably the most important thing we'll discuss in the whole class. I'm going to pull up a chart. What happens is the singer will sing something here, and then here they'll repeat it. They'll say pretty much the same thing, and then they'll rhyme the 3rd time. This is a gold mine, because if you learn to play your instrument like a blues singer, now you're expressing yourself in a whole higher level. Let's talk about this. So a classic blues lyric would be you say one thing, see I got me, see, let me get my voice back on. Got me a real nice lady, she's as nice as she can be. And then when it goes to the second line, the 4 chord, we say the same thing. Got me a real nice lady, she's as nice as she can be. Now the third time we have to rhyme. It's like a limerick. You get to repeat yourself, but you got to rhyme the third time. She comes home every night drunk and beats the crap out of me. Okay, true story. So here's the thing. If we take that vocal lyric and we put it into our scales, now we're talking, man. It sounds like you're saying something. Here's how that would work on the ukulele if you did a 3-phrase blues solo. Remind me to tab this out, Roseanne. It's actually a really good study. So we would go, let's see. Here we're in G. Second time. Now we got a rhyme. On any instrument, it's the same thing. I want you to do an exercise, which is put on a slow blues backing track. Slow is key here. And then you're going to practice a 3-phrase solo. All you have to do is make up a phrase and then stop. And then do the same thing again over the second line. And then the third time you have to do something that's different and sort of sounds good over the 5 chord. So, for example, there we go. Then I wait. There comes the C chord. I go. Here comes the D, the last line. Now we got to do something different. It works like magic, and it really does make you sound like you know what you're doing over the blues, because there's a tendency for string players to play too much. Guess what? Wind players have to breathe. They have to breathe in after a bunch of notes. We don't have to. We can just go nuts. There was an exercise I had a really good jazz teacher show me where he'd have me take a breath and then play while I breathed out like I was a saxophone player. How we go? I'm out of breath. I'm breathing in again. I have to stop playing until I'm breathing out. Now it's a little odd. I got dizzy too much, so I had to stop it. But it does show us that if you are playing like you're breathing or with like spaces, it's going to sound more expressive. So let's talk about item 3 under D, playing over the 5 chord. This is the one catch to me saying the minor blues is a safety scale. When the 5 chord comes around, you can always tell who's a good blues player and who's just kind of learning. The people who are just kind of learning will play the same exact thing over the 5 chord. The people who are more experienced will play something that sounds like the 5 chord. So the trick is to play the 7th arpeggio of the 5 chord. So when you're playing your minor blues scale, let's say we're in G, and the third line when that D7 pops its head up, you're going to grab a D7 arpeggio, and you're going to use that like a boogie woogie phrase. And that's going to make it sound like you know how to paint that 7th chord. So let's say we're in blues in G. Here's my solo. And I wait. There comes the 4, my second repetition. Now when it comes to the D, I'm literally going to play a D7 arpeggio. And then back to the G. You don't have to be so literal, but I'm just being obvious here. So another exercise I'd like you to work on is when you're improvising over the blues. When the third line comes up where you're supposed to say something different, you're going to use an arpeggio, not a scale. And it's going to be a dominant 7th arpeggio, in other words, the flat 7 of the 5 chord. And we're going to try to use that as opposed, we're going to leave the blues scale for a second and then come back after that. Call and response, item 4 under D. A lot of times blues players will play something low and then play it high. Well, obviously they're probably playing high. Let me rephrase that. And a higher register. So check this out. Here's my low phrase. Now watch this. We go to the C. Another trick it's fun to do is see if you can't play a couple note little phrase and then find that same thing an octave higher. Call and response. You'll hear that a lot in blues soloing, okay? Let's talk about where jazz comes in. Jazz sneaks its way into everything. First of all, you want to learn the ninth chord. And there's chord charts I have that have these. Email me if you need them. The ninth chord is like a spicier seventh, meaning you can use it anywhere you'd use a seventh chord. Whenever you're seeing a piece of music and it's got a seventh chord, this is just the plain seventh, not the major seventh. You can put a ninth chord over that. So let's say we have a G7. I would go like this. It's just got that ninth note of the scale in there, or the second plus an octave. You'll hear people do that. Check this out. Those are ninth chords. They've got more of the uptown sound, really smoky, kind of jazzy. You can get away with using ninth chords in any blues song. Just wherever there's a seventh chord, you replace it with a ninth. Item B under 6, passing and substitute chords. Anytime you're about to go to the next chord in blues, check this out. This is a great hack. You don't even have to think about it. Hit that next chord on purpose a fret too low and slide up to it. That's called a chromatic passing chord. And so a lot of people found this out by accident. But if we're going G, I'm going to go up to C, right? I'm going to hit a B and then slide up. Here we go. That reminds me, there's a great gag this old country player used to do. He'd end his song, he'd go, and he hit the last chord on purpose, a fret too low, terrible. But then check out how he'd remedy the situation. He'd push the instrument into the right fret and keep his hand in the same place. That's one you can steal. So passing chords are anything you can put in between two chords that sound like it's pulling to the next chord. So a lot of people will use diminished chords and augmented, but that's the jazz. That's in the jazz workshop. We're just doing blues passing chords, which is you just literally move up one fret to the chord you're going to. Jazzier scales. We talked about, let's talk about the Mixolydian Pentatonic. This is a really fun, scary sounding scale. I'm going to give you the formula, and I want you to learn it on your own, and then we'll quiz you at your lessons. It is, Mixolydian Pentatonic is 1, 3, 4, 5, flat 7. 1, I'll say it again, 3, 4, no, sorry, 1, 3, 4, 5, flat 7. Wild, it's so simple, but check out how it sounds. It almost has kind of a sort of a Middle Eastern flair to it. It's really kind of cool. That's another scale you can use for blues and a more jazz tip. Now, 2 under jazzier scales, I say just for spice, dissonant scales. Sometimes you can get away with a little bit of chromatic scales. They're very dissonant, but used as a tiny bit of spice, they're actually really cool. So for example, if I'm playing G blues, watch this. As long as I got to the next chord, I can use a bit of a chromatic scale. A chromatic scale uses every fret. Here's a great way to think of this. You just go every fret on your instrument. That's a chromatic scale. So sometimes you'll hear people use that in the context of the blues very sparingly, very sparingly. Here's my blues scale on the uke. Now watch me sneak in chromatics. Or maybe here. We know where we're going, it's going to sound good. So that's a little bit of dissonant scales for you, and we'll talk about that later in private lessons of how you use the chromatics. Number 7, blues flavored solos. Here's how we start to use this stuff. Generally, most of us aren't in blues bands. You might be, but I can tell by the lack of empty whiskey bottles around your environment. If you're going to play country or bluegrass or anything but Celtic music, you want to flavor your solos with those blues scales we talked about earlier. So first of all, you'll probably be playing with whatever licks you do. The banjo's a highly stylized instrument, so I like to demonstrate that. Let's say we're playing Coming Around the Mountain. Now watch this. toss in a blues fragment. You can flavor your solos. You don't have to play the whole thing with the blues scales. So that's another exercise, is play something happy and major and see if you can put in a little bit of a blues scale. Now, item B under 7 is arranging leads. Some of you right here in this class are already doing that as a homework assignment, where we'll pick a song and we'll say, we want you to come up with a blues flavored lead to that song. I think we've done this, Dennis, where we'll pick a song. Let's say we're doing, Wayfaring Stranger, you know. No, what key would that be in? I am a poor wayfaring stranger, traveling through this wearisome land. If we take that and we want to flavor it with blues, guess what? You go back to those formulas I gave you. Let's say we choose the modern blues scale in A. Really cool. So we might come up with a lead part that would sound like this. So everything we would do in that lead would have that blues flavor because we use the blues scale as our template. So think about that. Think about a song where you want a variation for. Like if you play You're My Sunshine already, but you're kind of over how you do it. It's very monotonous. Try to come up with a version of You're My Sunshine that uses the blues scale. That's how we use that flavor to make leads and variations. That's item B under 7. So it might not be appropriate, but you could do it. Let's say I probably wouldn't do it, but here's the melody to You're My Sunshine. It's pretty happy. You wouldn't want to do that to that poor song. But for demonstration purposes, you know who did that? Bill Monroe would do that. He would be playing he'd be playing some really up-tempo, happy bluegrass song, and all of a sudden, he would do that. He would be like extremely bluesy all of a sudden. He was kind of an odd character, not the most open-minded fellow around, I hear. But rumor has it he used to sit around on the back porch and, pass bottles around with people who were real, like, blues people with, like, teeth missing and dogs hanging out. And he learned a lot from those folks. And it snuck into his music later on. Finally, the last item here, C under 7, writing your own blues song. Guess what? If you can tie your shoe, you can write a blues lyric. Can't tie my shoe. I hear that one happening now. All you need to do is think of a funny, sad subject, and you write a line about it, and then you repeat the same line, and then you rhyme the third time. That's a fun party game. That's a fun jam game. And as soon as the zombie apocalypse is over, and we're doing, what humans do, is sit around the campfire and pick again, which we will. Think about coming up with blues lyrics on the spot. What a great game that is. Let's see. Like I've been down so long, it feels like up to me. I get to say it again. I've been down so long, it feels like up to me. I got a rhyme now. Gray skies and muddy water, as far as I can see. It's such a fun game. If you're composing it, you have all the time in the world to do that. So, like I like to say, the only difference between improvisation and composition is a time factor. You could play Beethoven's Ninth this evening if you took 45 minutes between each note. You could play it this evening for a show. It wouldn't be a problem. So when you're writing your blues lyrics, you have all the time in the world to think about the next line. But I want you to try, in the privacy of your own home, because it's going to sound funny at first, improvising a blues lyric. Because that's going to tie back into 3-phrase soloing on your instrument. Very important. The blues is one of the best styles you can learn. And this ties into my workshop on August 22nd, Expression, because we're going to be showing you why this, I mean, flat picking stuff is great. Fast notes are great. Fast banjo solos are great. But this, that says more than all those other notes. It has expression, and I don't know why. I'll try to figure that out before the next workshop so I can explain it. Man, I'm really glad you guys all showed up. It's so great to see all of you. It's really, really fun. Thanks for allowing me to discuss these subjects. It's really what I love doing. I'll post this on YouTube soon. You can view it that way. And I'll be seeing you all soon in our upcoming Zoom lessons together. Feel free to email me after this is done and let me know if you have any other questions or need any materials I mentioned. And I hope you all have an awesome weekend full of blues in a good way. Everybody take care.